Man, it's so good, and hopefully that was illustrating in your mind what Brody was preaching last night, because that really connects what we looked at last night, really the beginning of Abraham's walk with God, his relationship with the Lord, and where we're going to pick up this morning, where they're like bookends. We're going to look at, man, he goes through this crazy journey, and then really right at the end of his story, man, he has one of the most difficult. Let me rephrase that. He has the most difficult trial of his life. And in fact, what we're going to learn is that, man, God puts him to the test. God tests Abraham, and he's testing his faith. And what's portrayed there in that video for us, remember last night, man, God makes these promises, and then he ratifies it. He makes this covenant, and he ratifies it in blood. And Abraham, he doesn't walk through. Right? He doesn't walk through the blood. He doesn't walk through the animals, saying that, man, God is the one who's going to accomplish this. God is, by that act, saying, man, I'm going to accomplish my promises. He's saying, and if I don't, what you can expect is that my life will be forfeit. And what we know about God is he doesn't die. Right? God does not die. He doesn't die, and he doesn't lie, and he's made this promise to Abraham, and we see him and just watching. He's a witness to that event. And what the Bible does, though, and what especially the New Testament, is that it holds up Abraham as been one of the best examples of faith in history. Paul, James, the writer of Hebrews, Jesus himself, I mean, they hold Abraham up and say, this is what saving faith looks like. Remember? He calls him out, makes these promises, says go, and Abraham believed God. And so it was accounted to him as righteousness. He was counted, he was seen before God as righteous, as having always obeyed, as if he was perfect because of his faith. And so what happens is, man, throughout the Bible is we have these types of faith put in front of us so that we can examine ourselves. Like, man, is our faith like that? Is it that type of faith? The faith that follows, the faith that trusts, the faith that will persevere to the end? Or do we have the type of faith that when trials and testing comes, does it fall away? And so that's what we're going to see in the life of Abraham. And so, real quick, bring us up to speed on what's happened between last night and this morning's text. But I want to say this. The New Testament gives us two really important keys for really any time we read the Old Testament. As Christians, as believers who recognize and see and submit to Christ, the New Testament gives us two keys for how we're to read the Old Testament. And the first is this. It tells us that everything that happens in the Old Testament is for our example and our instruction. One, for our example of, yeah, this is what it looks like to follow God. This is what it looks like to live the life of faith. And it's instructive because it's teaching us, it's revealing to us who God is, his nature and his character, and how he treats and acts and responds to his people. And so as we go through this, like, we very much should be looking for, okay, what can I learn from this example? But the second thing is this, and it's what Jesus hammered home and made so clear to the Pharisees and to his disciples. He said, oh, all of that, everything that happened in the Old Covenant, everything from the Old Testament, that was all pointing to me. That was all done so you would anticipate and understand who I am and what I'm accomplishing. And so this morning, as we walk through this text, I want to see it through both lenses. Okay, what's the example that I should learn from? And then, how do I see Christ in this story? Well, I told y'all to turn, and I forgot to. Here we go. Genesis 22. You ready? Well, I guess not. Do we need to, chop some more logs? Y'all good? Man, okay, one, Drew tore through that log. like a lot of you, tore through the biscuits and gravy. I mean, it was impressive. What's most impressive is I was back there cheering him on, and I forgot, like, 2 minutes before he came up on stage, he was telling me how he just has recovered from shoulder surgery that got tore up, and sorry, we didn't think that through, but man, he dominated. And Bradley, thank you for participating. Drew attacked the log like y'all attacked biscuits and gravy, and Bradley attacked the log like the biscuits and gravy is now attacking you. Yeah, which I also won't take offense when there's a steady stream of, never mind. Okay. Genesis 22, you ready? All right. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. All right. So when we left Abraham, and he was trusting, he was obeying, he was following, not perfectly, man, we looked at that. Man, highs and lows in his life. Moments of unbelief, moments of doubt, moments of just straight up disobedience, and which Brody pointed out, right? That's typically where we can actually relate to him more. And so what's happened in between the passages is this, that God has blessed them with the promised child. Isaac has been born. There's all these moments where, man, Abraham goes to God and he's like, man, you haven't given me an heir. Could it be my servant? And God says no. And then, man, they try to take matters into their own hands. If you know the story, Sarah, Abraham's wife, actually suggests that, well, maybe the way that God's going to perform his promise is you sleep with my maid and that child will be the heir. And he does it. Abraham goes through with it and has Ishmael. And God comes to him and says, no, Ishmael is not the son of promise. He's not the one through whom the promises will come. That's not the one that I'm going to bless the nations through. You're going to have your own son. And they finally have him. Isaac is born. And God makes it very clear to Abraham. He says, it's through Isaac that your offspring is confirmed and will be blessed. And then through them, that the world will be blessed, all the nations of the earth. So God has been very clear and very specific. It's this son, it's Isaac. He says, your only son that you love. But now he calls him to go do something. Now we got the wink, right? When Moses is writing down this story, he lets us in on it. He tells us what, right from the beginning? It's a test. He's testing Abraham's faith. He's testing Abraham. We know that. Abraham didn't know that. He just knows that, man, God has called me to do this. And what he's learned through all these years of walking with God is to trust and obey. It's to trust and obey. Every time he tried to take matters into his own hands, interpret things on his own, it got sideways. And so he's just obeying. Look at what happens. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So they went, both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. Verse 11. But the angel of Yahweh called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, Yahweh will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mountain of Yahweh it shall be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, declares Yahweh, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gates of his enemy. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived in Beersheba. It's a crazy story. I mean, even reading it, even knowing, right? Like, we get the wink, we get the nod. This is a test, right? For us, Isaac's life isn't really in the balance. But it's still heavy, right? It's still such a dramatic scene. You think the video that we watched last night to kick off the retreat, man, that's such a dramatic scene when he's lifting up the knife above his son. You think, okay, why would God do this? Why does God test us, period? Well, question mark. And then why in this way? Why this intense testing? What's the point of the test? We see it throughout the Bible, and I think it's such a good reminder for us, and this is where we take our instruction. So when we read this story that we should look for, okay, how does this apply to me? Because the Bible makes it clear. Like Peter said, man, y'all don't think it's strange when you face fiery trials as something weird is happening to you. Like, we should expect to be tested. We should expect trials in our life. Peter is specifically talking about trials that are born out of suffering. James said this. Remember James chapter 1? Let no one say, wrong James. Same James, wrong verse. James 1, 2 and 5. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, knowing that the testing of your faith produces. Why? Why does he test us? Knowing that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect or complete or mature, lacking in nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. He's telling us, man, it's to demonstrate and show us and reveal the type of faith that we have. It's to strengthen our faith. It's to grow our faith. When we face the trials, it exposes us. It exposes the type of faith that we're really living with, that we're operating out of, that we really have in Jesus. when I'm tested, does my faith respond? Do I grow? Does it look like obedience? Or does my faith fall away? Abraham had been on both sides of that through different testing. Just like, man, for any believer in the room, our faith is tested. You can think back on, no doubt, if you could ask Abraham, on this side, if you could go back in time, would you change anything? I wouldn't have told that king that Sarah was my sister. Actually, I went and told both those kings on those two separate occasions that Sarah was my sister. Yeah, and there's so many things, but I think in my life, as a Christian, since I've come to know Christ, so many things that if I could go back, man, I'd do it again. I'd do it differently. Not do it again, do it differently. I'll do it again. So much grace, just love grace. I'd do it differently. But we don't get that. We don't get do-overs, and we don't get to know, well, what if? What if Abraham hadn't had a child with Hagar? What would his life have been like? What would the world have been like if he hadn't done that? We're not told that. But it's awesome because here what we're going to learn is not just, okay, what type of faith do I have? Not, okay, this is not only just to grow my faith, but trials are given ultimately so that we see the faithfulness of God. Because here's what's beautiful. God uses both. He uses, man, when my faith is weak and I fail. Now, what does the Bible say? He works all things together for good, for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. Even my mistakes, yeah. And even what your mistakes really are. Sin, disobedience. God can use that? Yeah. Does he use our faith? Absolutely. Do you see at the end of this the tension that exists? Last night, the covenant is clear. God is the one who performs the covenant. It's God who passes through the animals. It's God saying, my life will be forfeit, and Abraham's on the sideline. He's not part of the equation. But what do we see here at the end? What does the angel of the Lord say to Abraham? This confuses me. Look at what he says. Verse 15, and the angel of Yahweh called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because, here's the confusing part. What's he doing? He's saying, Abraham comes through the trial. He was ready to kill Isaac. He's going to slaughter his only son, the son of promise. He was going to plunge the knife into his heart. And the angel of the Lord says to him, because you have done this, and then he restates the promises in the covenant. There's this tension of okay, I thought you were going to do this just based on your word. And now he's saying, I'm going to do it because of your obedience. And this is where we get to stand back and say, okay, man, God, what are you revealing about yourself? What are you teaching us? And here's the beautiful part that should give us hope for when we fail, for when we're faithful, and all the way through, trusting that, man, God is walking us through this life of faith, is this. All of it was part of God's promise that he would do it, including Abraham's faith. Jesus, the writer of Hebrews would tell us that Jesus is the author and the perfecter of our faith. Do you see that? So was it Abraham's obedience? Was it the catalyst for the covenant coming to pass? Did Jesus actually get to the cross Was he born in Bethlehem and go to the cross because of Abraham's obedience? Yes. Does that take away from it being the sovereign plan of God? No, no, no. Abraham's obedience was born out of his faith, and his faith flowed not from himself. Abraham's faith, the type of faith that saves, man, it doesn't come from us. It's not produced in the heart of man. Abraham obeyed because he believed, because his faith flowed from the throne of grace and mercy, because Jesus is the author or the founder or the source and the perfecter of faith. That's awesome. That's our hope. So when we go through a trial, and some of you, man, I'm tempted to always say, and man, this is a unique, intense trial. I can't imagine losing one of my kids at all, let alone like God asking me to be the one who takes it. But I don't, man, in a room this size, there's no telling what y'all have been through. We face trials that are difficult. Yeah, God's got it. He's sovereign over it. He's using all of it to grow us. He's using all of it to reveal himself to us. He wants to expose to us, okay, what type of faith do you have? Where's your faith at? And redirect us back on Christ. That's why he sends trials. That's why the Christian life is difficult. So we lean into him. And we can know, man, on the other side of it, always, he's got it. It's all part of his plan. So one pastor said it like this. He said, our obedience is the fruit of that faith, meaning the kind of faith that saves. The faith that justifies is the kind of faith that by the Holy Spirit changes us. If your faith in Christ leaves you unchanged, you don't have saving faith. Obedience, not perfection, but obedience, but a new direction of thought and affections and behavior is the fruit that shows that the faith is alive. James put it this way: the faith that is by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. Faith alone justifies, but faith that justifies is never alone. It always is accompanied by newness of life. Jesus is the author and the perfecter of our faith. So, man, in Hebrews chapter 11, we mentioned it last night. We're going to go there here in a minute. And Abraham's held up as this example of what saving and persevering faith looks like. And then he comes to the end of it and he says, yeah, because Jesus is the author and the perfecter of our faith. It's interesting, the angel says to him, now I know that you fear God, because you didn't withhold your son. The fear of the Lord, the Bible says, is the beginning of wisdom. And the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. So, we see Abraham's example. Man, we should evaluate, not necessarily, man, what would I do in that situation? Of course, every father thinks that, like, what would I do in that situation? Man, but Abraham, what's unique is at the time that Abraham's walked with the Lord. Because listen to this, listen to what the writer of Hebrews says about Abraham in this scenario. Hebrews 11, 17 through 19. It says this: by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. Abraham considered, he reasoned, that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. What Scripture's saying is that Abraham, when he gets this call, when Yahweh instructs him to kill his boy, he reasons it out. And it's this: He's walked with the Lord all these years through his own ups and downs, through his own faithful obedience and crushing defeats. He's walked with the Lord. And what he's learned through those trials, again, is this: I can trust him. God is faithful. God doesn't have ups and downs. God is faithful. And God made this promise. God made this promise. And he swore on his own life that he would keep the promise, and that it's specific to Isaac. Isaac is the offspring. So as Abraham's processing this and he's walking, it's like a 3-day journey, and he's walking next to his son, the son of promise. He's reasoning in his mind, okay, God can't die and God doesn't lie, and he's promised that Isaac will be the heir and all the blessings are going to flow through Isaac. And if that's the case, and he's told me to kill my son, and I have to obey him. Anytime I don't obey him, it goes sideways. I'm going to obey him. I'm going to trust him. What can this possibly mean? And the only reasonable explanation that Abraham can come up with is, if I kill my son, God will just raise him from the dead. And for us, we're like, yeah, absolutely, because our whole faith is built around resurrection. Everything's resurrection. Our hope is that Jesus rose from the dead. Our future hope is that we will rise and be raised forever in a body that doesn't die. Like, that means everything to us. Abraham had no idea. But based on God's character, God's nature, and how he'd revealed himself, trial after trial, test after test, victory and defeat coming in waves, what he thought, he reasoned out, oh, God will just raise him from the dead. Isn't that awesome? It's a life that has been spent through victories and failures, always getting his eyes back on who God is and what God's word had said to him. And God in his grace doesn't allow Abraham to go through with it. Remember the video last night where angel Lord grabs his hand, stops him from plunging the knife. In Scripture, he speaks. Abraham gets his attention. It's urgent. In my mind, while I read that, they calls his name twice. I think, man, it's because he's on the downswing. He stops him. He says, don't harm him. Don't touch him. And this is where, we need to learn from Abraham's example. What does faith look like? What does it mean for us to be tested? What's the purpose of God's test in our lives? But we're also to do what? Man, where do we see Christ in the story? And the awesome thing is, throughout the Old Testament, there's all these different ways that, just like Jesus said, it all points to him. It was all written about him. And there's all these different types and shadows and figures, and all of it ultimately points to Jesus. But in what way does this story point to Jesus? Because at some point you might be thinking like, oh man, yeah, like Abraham, take your only son, the son that you love, and you're like, okay, so Abraham's kind of like God the Father. And then you see Isaac, and he puts the wood on his back, and he's walking up the hill, and he doesn't fight back. Like, Abraham's well over 100 years old. Don't know for sure how old Isaac is, but old enough to juke a 100-year-old man, right? Like, pretty easy. He's getting away. The video depicted it, I think, in a pretty cool way, where you see Isaac, he's putting out his hands. He's bound. And so it's easy to your mind starts working in that direction. Well, maybe Abraham's supposed to be like God the Father, and Isaac is supposed to be like Jesus. And then you get to this point, and you're like, okay, but, because why don't just stab him? And God raised him from the dead. We know God can raise people from the dead. As Christians, we know that. We see that. But that's not the real picture of Christ is in the story. It's all whispers, it's all shadow, it's getting our mind moving in that direction. But where is Christ in the story? One, he's the angel of the Lord. He's actually the one speaking to Abraham. But where's the type? Where's the picture? Where is he in the story? He's in a thicket. Did you see it? Verse 13. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. Instead of his son, in place of his son, as a substitute for his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, Yahweh will provide. And Moses says this, Moses, the one writing Genesis, as it is said to this day, on the mountain of Yahweh it shall be provided. Do you remember? Abraham's reasoned all this out. Walking to the mountain with Isaac, he's prepared to plunge the knife into his boy because he thinks God will raise him, God will raise him. God doesn't lie, God doesn't die, God will raise him. And Isaac goes, hey, Dad, by the by, notice we got some wood, good dry wood. So you got the fire, burnt offering, not just that you sacrifice an animal, but that the whole thing would be consumed. So you sharpened your knife this morning. Where's the lamb? Where's the lamb? Solid reasoning of his own, right? Good question. What does Abraham say? Do you remember? Yahweh will provide the lamb. And then when Yahweh provides the lamb, Abraham doesn't name the mountain. Abraham was obedient. He names the mountain, Yahweh will provide. Literally, it's that, it's where you've heard Jehovah Jireh, right? It's Yahweh will see to it. The Lord will see to it. Different than when Hagar said, Yahweh sees, he sees me, he sees my situation, and he rescues me in my distress. It's a different word. It's more of like when we say, like, if Brody told me to do something as my boss and I said, I'll see to it. What am I saying? It'll be done. It'll be finished. I'll take care of it. That's what he says here. Yahweh will see to it. See to what? He'll provide the substitute. He'll provide the lamb. He'll provide the substitutionary atonement, not Isaac. So we know where they go, this Mount Moriah. 1,000 years from that moment, when Abraham's wrestling the ram out of the thicket, 1,000 years from that moment, we know through different passages that this is where David's son, Solomon, would build the temple. It's in that same area. Listen to this. This is Jesus teaching. We're almost done. Jesus in John chapter 8. Do you have it on the screen, John 8? Yeah. Apparently I didn't have it in my notes. Your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day, and he saw it and was glad. And this is awesome. Jesus is talking with the Pharisees, and he's confronting them, and he's saying to them, he's like, man, they're claiming to have Abraham as their father, to have God as their father, and Jesus says, man, if God were your father, you would believe in me because I've come from him. And he says, and if Abraham were your father, you would do the works that Abraham did, which, what are the works of Abraham? He believed. He said, man, he says, you're of your father, the devil. Youch. And then he says to him, and your father Abraham, he saw my day and rejoiced. And I don't know, like, maybe he's talking about how Abraham throughout his whole life of walking with God, and he was putting it all together, and it just gave him a general idea of like, man, there's something coming. When he said through my son and through this nation, he would bless all the nations of the earth. He had a general idea of what was to come in Christ. Or just maybe, if you allow me to speculate just a little bit, just maybe when Jesus is saying that Abraham saw his day, Jesus' day, and rejoiced, maybe when it clicked for Abraham of what it would mean that his ultimate offspring and his ultimate heir would bless the entire world, maybe as he was grabbing that ram that he's going to sacrifice as a substitute for his son, and he's pulling it out of the thicket, maybe through tears of joy as he's pulling it, and his physical vision is blurred. Maybe God allowed him to see 1,000 years into the future, right where he's standing, a temple, priest, his heirs, his offspring, killing lamb after lamb after lamb as a substitute, as a picture to cover the sins of his people. But maybe he knew, even in that moment as he held its horns, some idea, but the blood of bulls and goats can't really take away sin. And maybe, just maybe, God allowed him to see another 1,000 years into the future. On a nearby hill, when his ultimate offspring, the ultimate heir, Jesus, did carry his cross up the hill. Where God would ultimately, we're on the mountain where God ultimately would provide it. Provide what? The substitutionary sacrifice that would take away the sins of the world. The lamb that was spotless and blameless, that laid down his own life, was crucified. And the wrath of God poured on him for our sins, so that we could be given his righteousness by faith. Maybe, I don't know. I like to think so. But for us, we're looking back and we know, yeah, that's where Christ is in the picture. That's where he is in the story. That's where he always is. Standing between us and the wrath of God to take away our sin and to provide us with his righteousness. And what we've already learned, not only that, but the very faith he calls us to have in him, he provides. He's the author, he's the source, he's the founder, and he's the perfecter of our faith. He really did pay it all, and he provides it all. And so then it frees us to do what? To obey, to trust him. So that, when we mess up and we fail and we get our eyes off of him and we do things that we wish we hadn't done, we don't get to wallow in self-pity, and we don't get to beat ourselves up and think, man, my life went off the tracks years ago, and you don't know my story, and man, if I hadn't done this or I hadn't done that, but man, where I am now, man, there's no coming back. No. That doesn't exist. Why? Because God works all things together for good for those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. His grace covers that, and his plan and his sovereignty, man, it takes into play everything in your life for your good and for his glory. And that's our hope. That's our confidence. Abraham called the name of the place, Yahweh will provide. And he has. He provided Jesus on Calvary to take away our sin, to, in its place, give us his righteousness so that we could walk in obedience and faith to the end.